Well, hello there. I'm back. Today I am doing something a little different. We are still talking about our founding principles, but this time we're going a little deeper. We're going to be talking about the booklet Common Sense by Thomas Paine. What I'm about to read to you is an essay that I wrote. I wrote it as a way just to teach myself the concepts in common sense. I'm also starting a Substack where you can find an article version of this same essay that I'm about to read to you. So if you want to find me over there, there's going to be different content, the same type of things that we talk about here, but just a little more in depth. Okay, so today my essay on common sense. It is titled The Principles of Common Sense, or the Pain of Reason. Common sense is a term we hear a lot these days, especially by many in politics and media. Does anyone actually have it? Some seem more sensible than others. How do we know if we have common sense? Are there principles we can check our sense against to evaluate if we are thinking critically? Are there things we can ponder when debating ideas with ourselves? I'm sure the American forefathers pondered much in life. They must have been bogged down by the weight of the decisions they had to make. What did they check their sense against? They were all influenced by the Enlightenment and Greek philosophy, so that must have helped. But how did they think through heavy issues, like whether or not to rebel, or if freedom was worth their lives and the lives of their fellow colonists? Luckily, we have one forefather who spelt it out for the rest of them, and for us. Thomas Paine, a slightly lesser-known forefather, wrote a pamphlet laying out why independence from Britain was just plain common sense. Clearly, it was intended to be applied to his time and place. What about our time and place? Does its principles under the title Common Sense still make, sense? Can these principles in this pamphlet help us when thinking critically about our founding and the continuance of this nation? Thomas Paine was born on January 29, 1737, in Norfolk, England, to a Quaker family. He went to school until the age of 12, when he then became an apprentice to his father, learning stay making. A stay is a woman's corset. Not a whole lot is known about his early life, but it seems he spent most of his time in London. He continued his work as a stay maker and married his first wife in 1759, who then died in childbirth along with the child a year later. He ended up on the south coast of England, where he became a member of the debate society, the Headstrong Club. This is where he became very involved in politics and civic service. After his second marriage failed, he moved back to London, where he began a friendship with Benjamin Franklin, who he had met at the Royal Society, and then moved to the British colonies on the American continent at Franklin's recommendation. He arrived in Philadelphia in November 1774. He became an editor at Pennsylvania Magazine, where he made many contributions that led to a reputation as a radical through his articles on the abolition of slavery and independence for the colonies. Right about the time the tensions between the colonies and the British Empire were getting to a boiling point. In the fall of 1775, he began to work on his booklet, Common Sense. It made a case for American independence. He shared what he was writing with Benjamin Franklin, Samuel Adams, and others. It was a hit in the colonies and garnered the attention of George Washington and Thomas Jefferson. Many people at this time were still really hoping for reconciliation with the British Empire in order to avoid a bloody battle. But this booklet showed why independence was the better option, despite the price it would cost, and had a major hand in swaying the public's support for independence. Though his views expressed in Common Sense may have been seen as radical at one point, many were coming to realize that in some cases you may have no choice but to be radical if you want to live free. Many things led Paine to write this booklet. One very important influence was the events of April 18, 1775, at Lexington, Massachusetts. That night, the British Empire sent 700 troops to Concord to destroy colonial weapons and arrest Patriot leaders. On the 19th, 70 Lexington militiamen confronted the British. The militia was clearly outnumbered and ordered to stand their ground, but not to fire unless fired upon. A shot was fired, mostly thought to be from the British, leading to chaos and the militia scattering. When the British made it to Concord, they found little weapons or patriots. There had been time to hide because of the holdup at Lexington with the militiamen. Meanwhile, hundreds of colonial men began to gather there in Concord, and a fight broke out, leading to British troops firing, and a full-on battle ensued. This was the first instance of real colonial resistance. The British had to retreat. By the time the battle was over, thousands of militiamen from surrounding towns had ambushed the British. The British losses far outweighed the colonies. This, combined with everything else the colonists had been enduring, inspired Paine to do something. Many of us have felt this same feeling recently with the assassination of Charlie Kirk. We're sad, then angry, then motivated. How can we make a difference? Paine used the most destructive weapon he had in his arsenal of God-given gifts, the pen. As painful as it can be to reason with ourselves, to think through ideas critically and check our own biases, it is even more painful to reason with others. One must be strategic in getting others to listen. Paine was. Paine used a few different methods to spread his noble contagion to the general population. Partnerships with traditional printers and publishers was the main strategy for distributing the pamphlet. He started with printing 1,000 copies, which was significant for the time. He also kept the price of the booklet reasonable enough for the common person of the time to afford. Paine was okay with losing out on significant royalties in order to prioritize circulation over profit, which aligned with his ideals. With its immediate popularity, he had to continually reprint the booklet to keep up with demand. The first edition sold out in a matter of weeks. It was so popular that pirated copies started turning up, distributed by those excited to get the word out. These illegal copies made their way through the underground patriot taverns and coffee houses. Paine realized this benefited the cause, which was more important than missed profits. Sons of Liberty, a patriot group, also handed out copies in the cities and in the rural areas. It was often read out loud at public meetings and town halls, which enabled the illiterate to share in the discussions as well. With its short length, it made it easy for everyone to share and distribute, compared to if it had been a full-length book. The word of mouth was probably the biggest impact on its popularity. With all that was going on in the colonies, and the colonists' daily dealings with the intolerable treatment of King George III of England, how could it not have been all the rage? Colonial anger was rising every time a new injustice from the royal brute was reported in the papers. Estimates of 100,000 to 150,000 copies circulated by mid-1776, very significant for a population of about 2.5 million. His clear and fiery writings was easy to understand and argued for universal principles, not personal ones, adding even more to the public appeal. Because of its popularity and widespread distribution, it naturally came to the attention of the Founding Fathers. They most likely encountered it through their roles in the Continental Congress and patriot organizations they routinely engaged with. With Paine's association with those such as Franklin and Adams, it very easily passed to Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, who required the Continental Army to study it. Letters between those of the Continental Congress show hot debate on the booklet. Its arguments for independence resonated with the radicals and swayed those of a more moderate conviction to get on board with a formal break from Britain. This debate among them eventually led to action. The results of this historic writing has reverberated down to our own time. Not only did it inspire action on the part of the everyday people of the colonies to cherish freedom enough to die for it, it inspired the same in those of the colonies in a position to make moves towards freedom possible. Without the support of the people, independence probably would have been defeated by fear and inaction long before its first battle with the greatest empire of the time. Please try to imagine your life if this had never happened. If we were still under the rule of a king an ocean away who sees you as a cog in a machine to control at his whim. I can only imagine it would be even worse now than it was then. With the way technology has exacerbated every aspect of our lives, I can only see a life of outright slavery in a dark cubicle with every eye movement monitored and every bathroom break timed. We don't live there yet because of the likes of men like Thomas Paine and their courage to speak. But that doesn't mean it isn't possible still. It is inevitable without men like Paine now. The power of this writing has stayed off that dismal inevitability. The people who read and shared his booklet also are worthy of our appreciation and remembrance. George Washington, in a letter to Joseph Reed on January 31st, 1776, said, "A few more of such flaming arguments as were exhibited at Falmouth and Norfolk, added to the sound doctrine and unanswerable reasoning contained in the pamphlet Common Sense, will not leave numbers at a loss to decide upon the propriety of separation." The Pennsylvania Evening Post wrote, "Every American is now put in possession of facts which demonstrate the necessity of independence." And my personal favorite, the Virginia Gazette in March of 1776 said, "Whoever has not read Common Sense is deficient in the first duty he owes to his country." There are few writings in this world that has had the impact as Common Sense. It resonated with the people and the leaders of the colonies for many reasons. To me, the most effective aspect of resonation was his ability to use plain English to communicate his ideas to those who did not understand Latin or legalese. He wrote at a 6th grade reading level. He spoke the way most people of the time did. The everyday person could comprehend every word and idea. Paine also was able to appeal to the general public's Christian tradition, tugging on their spiritual predicament. Reverend Jonathan Boucher, a British loyalist, angrily said, "He quotes scripture better than half the clergy, yet turns it against the king." Another contributor to its success was its timing. I'm unsure if he had the work finished and was holding on to it for just the right time, or if it was all just a coincidence. But it was published just 2 weeks after the king, in a speech, referred to the colonists as rebels to be crushed. Paine's line, "the royal brute of Britain," referring to the king, fell upon the common folk's ears as one of their own buddies' vernacular. It also spelled out the immorality of a hereditary monarchy as being an absurdity, again, appealing to the Christian morality of most of the working class population. Common Sense pointed out the difference between the cultures of the colonies and the British, and how their cultures did not align. It's no wonder it went viral before viral was a thing. Paine spoke the way the people spoke. He used logic they could check against their own reasoning abilities, and he gave words to how they felt. This is why so many back then listened to him. But why should we listen to him? Why should we pick up the principles he laid down? Let's go over these principles to see if they still resonate today. The principles of common sense can help us reason on the government Paine and the rest of our forefathers constructed and fought so hard for themselves and their posterity. That's you and me. These principles can help us reason on whether this government is still working for us and for as many people as possible. Principle 1. A Republican form of government is the best form of government. Paine starts out with something we should definitely all know. Government is a necessary evil. It has issues and problems and corruption because human nature is all these things. That being said, we still need order and those that enforce order. This being true, the government should protect and bring the most happiness to the most people possible. Paine felt the best way to achieve this was through a government based on the consent of the governed and elected representatives of the people, so a democratic republic. He believed laws should rule, not kings, because that requires power to be derived from the people. Principle 2. Monarchy and hereditary succession is absurd. Paine says that a monarchy, especially with a hereditary succession, is absurd. A king, because of the nature of being royalty and the progression of his life of shelter and luxury, he would not be equipped to rule justly. He also emphasizes that kings lack the divine authority that they proclaim to have. Speaking of the divine, Paine also argues that monarchical rule is anti-Christian. He says, in the early ages of the world, according to the scripture chronology, there were no kings, the consequence of which was there were no wars. It is the pride of kings which throws mankind into confusion. A king would also be idolatrous, because this would imply a person was more capable and deserving to rule than God. Principle 3. Self-sufficiency makes America better. Another very strong argument against dependence was that America could take better care of itself than Britain could. The American continent has all the resources, population, and potential to not just survive, but to thrive. In fact, King George III wasn't really that interested in the colonies or what they did until they started to make a little money. Paine said that trade with other nations would actually do even better without Britain getting involved with their rules, regulations, and restrictions. They would make more money if the British were not inserting themselves into their commerce. Principle 4. Government should be based on natural rights and equality. Paine, being influenced by the ideas of the Enlightenment, felt that all people are created equal and have inalienable rights. Having these rights would make any king illegitimate, and so no king could have a claim over the colonies. This idea of natural rights and equality made the colonists culturally different from the British. So it stands to reason their form of government should be different as well. Do these principles sound like common sense to you? If they do, you may be a constitutionalist. since all these principles are what our founding documents and thus our government is based on. If you believe that a representative form of government is the best form of government, you may be a constitutionalist. If you believe that having a king with a hereditary succession is absurd and unjust, you may be a constitutionalist. If you believe that America is better off being self-sufficient rather than relying so heavily on other countries, particularly our enemies, for our goods and services, you may be a constitutionalist. If you believe in natural rights that you are born with and that all men are created equal, I hate to break it to you, but you may be a constitutionalist. You may be one of those common sense pains in the asses that want to conserve the Constitution. Common sense tells me that these principles still apply. It still applies that a Republican form of government is what brings the most happiness to the most people possible. If not, why do so many flock to countries with this form of government? It still applies that a government ruled by one person, installed through their bloodline, is absurd and ripe for injustice and suffering. If not, then why do countries that are ruled over by a single person suffer so greatly? It still applies that the more America can do for itself, the more self-sufficient it can be, the better it is for its people and its security. If not, then why does it seem that the decline in the quality of the American lifestyle seem to correspond with our dependence on other countries? And it still applies that a government that acknowledges the sovereignty of the people because of their natural rights and equality is the most fair and just form of government there can be. If not, then why do countries that do not believe in equal treatment under the law seem mired in violence and constant conflict? All of these principles are true today as they were true at the time of Paine's booklet. They are as true in the United States as they are in any country. If these principles are true at any time or place, that means they are universal truths. A universal truth can't be wrong. Today, the principles of common sense appear too painful to apply for some. It seems some just outright reject the principles of common sense, the booklet, and actual cognitive common sense, letting their ego and misapplied self-identification get in the way. Checking our sense against our biases can be difficult. Thinking that hard and judging your own thoughts can be painful. But you don't fear pain. You yearn for the growth that comes from it, just as our forefathers did. And just like our forefathers then, we can stave off the inevitable darkness of any other form of government with a little pain and a little common sense. Thank you for listening.